Welcome to Organize, the Business Law Breakdown. I'm your host, Seth C. Orenberg, Professor of Law at the University of New Hampshire School of Law and Director of the Program on Organizations, Business, and Markets at NYU's Classical Liberal Institute. And today, I'm delighted to be featuring a special podcast sponsored by the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, of which I am a member. And I'm honored to be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month by engaging in a conversation with three special guests, lawyers who identify as Hispanic. We'll be discussing their experiences in law school, their professional journeys, and their perspective on unique aspects of lawyering as a Hispanic attorney. Joining us today are Cesar Vega, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of New Hampshire, who brings his expertise in federal prosecutions and his experience working with diverse communities. Maya Dominguez, a public defender in New Hampshire, who has dedicated her career to ensuring fair representation for marginalized individuals. And Enrique Mesa, founder of Mesa Law, PLLC, an immigration attorney with firsthand knowledge of navigating complex legal systems on behalf of clients seeking justice in the immigration process. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with me here today and with our students. To begin, I'd like to invite you each to just share a little bit about what inspired you to enter into the law. And I'll just ask Maya to jump in and go first. Maya, why are you a lawyer today?
Well, I think that a big influence was my mom. So I'm a first-generation immigrant, and I moved here with my family when I was very young. And my mom didn't speak English. And we always joke that the way that she learned to speak English was from watching court TV. And so when other kids were watching My Little Ponies, I was watching court TV with them. And honestly, I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be a trial lawyer. Uh, I will say that when we used to watch the shows together, my favorite was on like Veterans Day when they would play reruns of famous trials like the OJ trial or the Menendez brothers trial. And my mom would always be on the side of the prosecution and I would always be on the side of defense. So it was no big surprise that I followed this track and I am here doing exactly what I always wanted to be. And it's pretty cool. In the last year, I was actually on court TV myself for the first time and the second time. So it's been a wild journey, but it really comes down to just watching TV with my mom.
Cesar, I think I heard you respond to that. Did that resonate with you? What is your journey like? And is there something in that story that resembles yours, or did you have a totally different pathway to law?
No, mine was slightly different, but the reaction was just that I know any close friends of mine who've had a similar story, or and so that's why I was paying close attention to it. But my story just slightly different. I would say there must be different sources of inspiration for me, but a couple that come to mind is both of my parents in Peru, which is where we immigrated from. They were law school graduates. They didn't necessarily practice, but they wanted to. And I don't think they got to that point where they're actually practicing attorneys before we immigrated. And I remember just being drawn to, at that young age, I must have been like 7, 8, 9, where, my father was just wanting to be in court all the time. He would dress up in a suit. I've always seen him in a suit. And that was something that was impressed on me, that I thought, all lawyers dress nicely and always in a suit and tie. And so when we immigrated and I was about 10, it was something that kind of stuck in the back of my head, that is, when people would ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would say, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. Just because, that image from when I was young kind of stuck with me. But then as time went on and I went into college, I read, I forget what opinion it was, but from the Supreme Court, and I was just struck by how well written, this opinion was. And I knew I wanted to, at some point, maybe write that way and educate myself about the law and the different things that I could do with it in terms of like helping people, helping the community. And that kind of drew me closer to public service, as opposed to, private practice. So it was a number of things along the way, but those are the two that come to mind.
Enrique, you're in private practice. So did you get there in a straight line or tell me about your story. How did you arrive at where you are today and kind of what are your inspirations or
That
influences?
was the. I've been in private practice, I think, since I graduated from law school. I started out as a clerk for a boutique law firm in Miami Beach, and then slowly I got I passed the bar, and then became a full-fledged attorney, and was in Miami for about 2 years, and then came back to New Hampshire, and was an attorney was looking for the attorney that hired me, George Bruno. He was looking for an attorney that spoke Spanish to help the growing Hispanic community that he saw. And I've been here for 15 years. Wow. In New Hampshire now, practicing, and now co-owning my firm with my law partner. With regards to how I became an attorney, I'm a first generation American Cuban. My family came here from Cuba, and born and raised in Miami, and pretty much got my bachelor's in political science. And then everybody was asking, well, what are you going to do now? And that was a great question because I really didn't know. But I really always, I always believed in protecting people's rights and fighting for the underdog. And lo and behold, my cousin, who's was studying to become an attorney, and I'm like, you know what? Let me see if this is the right path, and here I am, and fighting for the underdog.
So staying with that path, so you said, a clerk and then passed the bar and then moved to New Hampshire, which is obviously a big move. And by the way, I'm from South Florida also, and now in New Hampshire. So, learning how to dress in layers and owning things that aren't made out of cotton is part of maybe that experience. But, staying with that, Enrique, is there anything particular? You mentioned his Spanish language. Is there anything in particular around language that was either, an entry point or at times a barrier? It sounds like that language aspect was part of your story. So can you kind of draw a little bit more about how language is, how that impacted that career trajectory?
Well, it does. It has, because even as a law student, I was extern for the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, and one of the attorneys, befriended me, and he told me, "Look, I know your help. I know that you are set going back to Miami, but you really should think about coming back or staying here in New Hampshire, because really the Hispanic community is just growing, and there's not enough attorneys." And that stuck with me, especially when we decided, me and my wife decided to go back to New Hampshire, and the reality is that there was, I think, the Hispanic community wants representation. They want somebody speaking their own language, somebody that can actually understand what they're saying, that they feel comfortable with sharing. And I really got that sense when I was in law school, when I externed, or even when I mediated in law school, that you're seeing people in the worst part of their lives, and they really want to share that with somebody. And having somebody speak their language really helps them in those situations.
Maya, I saw you nodding to that too. And so, that gives me an open door to ask you about language, I think, as well. Do you have a perspective on Spanish language and its role in Hispanic lawyering? Is that a part of your life? Is that a dimension you can speak to in your experience and practice?
Yeah, so I have sort of two thoughts on it. My first thought is I think that the influence for me has not been quite as direct. It has been more I wouldn't even say it's subconscious, but it's just when I was growing up, I mentioned that my mom didn't speak English. And even as she was learning, I was oftentimes put in a really interesting position where I was oftentimes a translator and I was oftentimes an advocate. And so I witnessed conversations and things that I would not ordinarily have been a part of as a child. And it not only brought me into a younger understanding of some greater societal issues, but it also inadvertently taught me to be an advocate and an advocate using words, interpreting not only those words, but situations. And I feel that that is essentially the description of what I do now. I advocate and I interpret. I interpret my clients' stories, I interpret their actions for the court, and I interpret the law for my clients. And so I do think that that is probably the biggest part of it, um, just the way in which it shaped my worldview. But the other part of it too is I remember when I was applying to different public defenders' offices out of law school, for example, I received an offer from the public defender's office in Miami, and I wasn't sure if I was going to accept that, and I was still waiting on New Hampshire. And one of the questions that I got in my interviews in New Hampshire were like, and not just like in the interview from other people was like, well, why are you going to go up there where there's like no diversity up there? Why are you going to go up there when you can go to Miami and you would be helping a whole lot more people using your language? And the answer to that is, yeah, I don't get to use my Spanish as often, but when I do in New Hampshire, I think it's more meaningful because there's less of us up here. And so I think that being able to communicate with my clients and oftentimes their families, even if it isn't when we're talking about the legal issues, just sort of like in getting to know them, that's been a huge part of my practice.
Cesar, you're on the other side of this. Well, you're our U.S. attorney, or you're on the prosecution side. Does Spanish language, play a role in your practice? Does it play a role in your life? You did mention you're from Peru at age 10, so it's a Spanish-speaking country. Has that had an impact on you, and is it a different impact maybe than someone who's more, I don't know, working on the defense side?
Um, it has had an impact. So when my family immigrated, we settled in Worcester, Massachusetts, so central Massachusetts, which is a very diverse community. And when we immigrated, it was, I think, in the public schools that I attended, it was, I wouldn't say, close to 50% Hispanic, Latino, and it's probably been grown since. And I practiced pretty much so I came up to work here in New Hampshire for the past 2 years. Before that, since I graduated law school in '09, I just practiced in Massachusetts. And even up here, sometimes, like most of the defendants that are prosecuted, at least that I prosecute, because of the nature of the cases, and mostly drug cases and gun cases in my case, involve defendants, people of color, many times Hispanic. And one thing I always keep in mind is that their families are always, almost all the times, present. And having that grown up in a close-knit community, and I think this is in general for many communities in different countries in Latin America, is that you are very close to your family and then your community, your neighborhood. So the people that look like you immediately are sort of, there's like an instinctive attraction to, or a trust that you give them. So I've noticed when I've appeared in court and I see family members of defendants, they immediately are drawn to me or come to me and asking me for advice, thinking that the last thing on their mind is that I'm the one on the other side prosecuting the case. And I also, I'm very careful not to take advantage of that. But at the same time, I also want to help them understand this difficult process, confusing, very hurtful and sometimes. And I sort of navigate those two, I see families of the defendants coming up to me, and I try to explain to them the process and the next steps. Um, and also trying to do my work and be as transparent as I can be. Um, and the language aspect does come into play because they always start with the same question in Spanish: do you speak Spanish? And of course I do. And then we start into this conversation, and again, it puts me in a position where I have to. I don't want to violate that trust that they initially brought them to come and start a conversation with me, and also want to be able to give them accurate information as much as I can about the case to at least help them understand the process. And then, direct their other questions more specific to, the defense attorney and other places. But I do try to be as helpful as I can so that they don't get, adversely affected by, some negative experience they might have with me. So I'm very careful in that way to, and understand that they trust me to some level, and I want to be able to keep that trust in the way I interact with family members specifically.
Cesar, you mentioned family and trust, and here you are in a community now that is less diverse. So, New Hampshire is unfortunately not certainly not one of the most diverse locations. I mentioned I come from South Florida. You mentioned Worcester, Massachusetts. There are other places that have more diverse communities. And did you in particular, or do you notice anyone in general that has challenges because of coming to a place that has less diversity? Is that is that entirely an asset? Does that have some drawbacks? I mean, have you experienced that in your own work that, when a person is either within a community where there's many people that look like them, they get treated differently when there's fewer people? Or what's your perspective on kind of being in these different types of diverse or less diverse situations?
I think it is, even when I was in law school, I went to law school in Boston, and I think Suffolk University, but I think it was probably the same for all law schools in terms of the demographic and how it breaks down. Like in 2006 or 2009, when I went there, I heard the statistic that there were less than 5% of Hispanic students in the class, and probably fewer than that practicing. So anytime I went to a courtroom, you're probably one, like maybe the only Hispanic attorney, maybe sometimes in some jurisdictions, probably the only person of color. But it's something that I don't know. I never really reflect too much on, because again, you're there, to do a job. And I don't think that I've experienced any challenges. I mean, perhaps some subconscious bias, some minor mistakes here and there where, people confuse what I'm there for. Maybe I'm confused to be the interpreter or something like that, but nothing that, would necessarily deter me from doing the job I have to do. Even coming up here to New Hampshire, one of my professional goals was to be a federal prosecutor, just to continue on that, public service career. And up here, it was really maybe just slightly different in terms of the diversity, because again, when you go in a courtroom among the practicing attorneys, there really isn't much, whether you go to, Worcester, maybe some in Boston, but up here in Concord, where, I mean, yeah, I can't say that there was one, any challenging aspect to it. But I do say that just, being here, I can tell the difference, because I immediately feel, like I want to meet, everybody in person, Enrique, Maya, and just kind of, talk and discuss what the experiences might be like, them having been here longer than I have. But for me, it's only been 2 years up here, so we'll see.
Maya, you've been here a little longer. What are your experiences, and would you respond to that question similarly or differently? I mean, because you also probably see clients as well. You mentioned you represent clients who speak Spanish. You've been an advocate for Spanish-speaking people or people who exclusively speak Spanish. Do you have any notions of how being either in a community that has many, many Hispanic people or very few impacts things like access to justice, impacts not just your work, but the role you play for your clients as well?
So my entire practice has been in New Hampshire. I've been in New Hampshire for 13 years, so I don't know what it is like to go and practice somewhere where I'm not, the only Latina in the room. So I can't really speak to that. And in terms of, uh, you know, issues that have held me back, I agree that there hasn't been like one big glaring example where I feel that, you know, me being Hispanic negatively impacted me. However, there are a lot of little things. So something like being mistaken for the interpreter or any other person in the process. And it doesn't happen to me as much anymore because I am in court every single day and they all know me now. But even when we get new bailiffs, that sort of thing, oftentimes I feel like I'm put through more scrutiny. Then there's also some very specific stereotypes when it comes to Mexican women, and it usually falls in one end of a spectrum, right? So the stereotype is generally like fiery, loud, sassy, and then the other end of the spectrum is sort of submissive, will do what they're told, follows the rules, and I don't. I don't know that it's something that's impacted me badly, but there's certainly been situations where I've been underestimated, and sometimes that's worked to my favor. Uh, I think that as attorneys, we're oftentimes put in a very difficult situation when even if there is something that happens that makes you feel very uncomfortable, I can't always or really ever say like, "Ooh, judge, that was really inappropriate. Like that was not okay. Like that sounded like I'm sure you're not racist, but like that sounded really bad." Like we can't have that conversation and not be negatively affected by it. And so what ends up happening is we don't have that conversation. Um, and I don't know if you want like anecdotes, but certainly there's been situations. I recall when I was a lawyer in Manchester, I was having a bail hearing for an individual, and he had a very stereotypical sounding Hispanic Latin name. I don't remember what the name was, but it was a combination of things of first name and last name that sounded common, but maybe necessarily isn't. And the state complained that they ran a search for that person's criminal record, and it seemed really odd that they didn't have anything. And the judge was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, so, like, that's fine. We'll put this off a little bit longer so that you can do a more accurate search." And so the assumption there was that, "Oh, he has a stereotypical Hispanic name, therefore there must be more than one of them, and one of them must have a criminal record." And I remember going back to the office after that and just being absolutely livid and, you know, trying to explain it to the court was not an option because the court was still yet to decide whether or not my client got to go home or not.
So what do you do with the emotions that brings? I mean, it's actually, I think, a theme for lawyers in general. You're an emotional role. So I think this is probably a lesson for all lawyers, but I mean, this is an opportunity to kind of take this one. Like, there are lots of slights and abuses in the law, and part of our role is to maybe be the person who gets the conflagration. Maya, kind of staying with that, do you have any strategies for students in general going to law or even lawyers? Like, what do you do with those emotions that you kind of can't bang on it right there?
I don't know if this is advice anyone wants to hear, but I mean, I like to have myself a good angry cry. Sometimes that's just what I need to do to get it out of my system. And I work with very supportive people who know that that is sometimes just something I need to do. I'm not doing it in front of the court. It's not inappropriate. I don't think that feelings are inappropriate. And so I think that there's bigger issues when you don't process those feelings and you don't work through those feelings and then you just let them build up until they either explode or you just quit because you can't do it anymore.
Enrique, I want to get your perspective on Miami versus New Hampshire. which, you being, I want to hear that, because that might highlight just how big a country we live in and how different it can be. But just staying on the point of sort of generally, as someone who runs a practice, can you tell me a little bit about like the emotional load that you bear in that? What is it? And sort of, do you offer any strategies? Is it difficult to be a solo? Is it difficult to run a firm? Are there sort of different emotional challenges that come with that students should be aware of before they maybe decide that they want to hang a shingle, that you could give them a flag about?
The one thing that law school doesn't teach you, how to run a business. I think it's, honestly, I think that, it's, juggling, personalities, especially especially client, that come in, and then, it's like, and sometimes I do feel like Maya, that, that you want to take an aside and have that emotional a moment, or, to yourself, because, there's a lot of times that people are coming here and, wanting you to help or save their situation or save their loved one from being, especially in my,
You're in immigration law, right?
in my purview. Yeah. They want
So,
me to save them. They want me to save them from
deportations maybe, and
being,
issues like that come up in your practice?
yeah, save them from being deported, or somebody's detained and they want me to get them out. I tell you, during, during the administration of, former President Trump, it was a very trying time, for me, because, I was at immigration court, every other day, trying to get, somebody, out on bond, for them to be with their loved ones. So it was a very, and really, you're dealing with, like Cesar said, you're not dealing with an individual. You're dealing with family. You're dealing with everybody in that family. If it's not the mother, it's the father. And you're basically, sometimes I like to think of myself as the quarterback. They're giving me the ball, and I have to figure out, what am I going to do with the ball? Am I going to run it, or what am I going to do? And I think that, unfortunately, I don't know about Cesar and Maya, but, I have to be on the ball, 24/7, and I can't say, hey, give me a day and I'm going to think about it and I'll get back to you. They want that, they want a response, ASAP, or, at least, or within 24, 48 hours. And, sometimes, sometimes, or a lot of times, it's exhausting, because, sometimes, you'll do the research, or find the time to do the research. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do. And then you really have to be, you have to explain to them the truth, and you have to explain to them, hey, your loved one did such and such, and there's nothing I can do. And, and a lot of times families don't like that. And I think one of the things that I have learned in my 15 years is, you need to tell the truth. And it's very easy to say it it's very easy to tell a family member the truth. But it's very hard when the family doesn't accept it. And it's very hard for, like, I had this case that this individual, was deported. The judge is like, no, I'm sorry. You've been, you have these, you have out of the 9, you've been arrested 10 times. Out of the 9 times that your case has been dismissed, this last arrest, this last conviction is too serious, and I'm just gonna, you don't merit remaining here in the country. And had nothing to do with the family, had nothing to do with the parents, had, had all to do with this gentleman's arrest record. And I'm allowed to say domestic violence. So, just for everybody to understand, that's where this is coming from. And the judge deported that person, and the family, the next day I'm sitting down with the family and I'm explaining them the situation, what happened. The family didn't want to accept it. The family's like, I promise you right now that if the judge heard from me, the mother of that person, that he would still be here. And I'm like, well, that's not, that's not,
It's not how it works. Yeah.
that's how it works. And I told her, I proffered your testimony. I provide what you were going to say. So that's not how this works. But they didn't like it. They went with another attorney. They spent over $10,000, and the person's still deported. So to me, it's like, I think my 15 years has shown me one thing, that people just want to hear what they want to hear. And it doesn't matter if you tell them the truth, they will find somebody that says yes, and they will spend that money with that person that says yes. Unfortunately, that's
Cesar, like, I'm watching, and I'm looking at the prosecutor in the room here too. I think students may not recognize to what extent being a prosecutor carries a heavy emotional load. And can you speak to that too, in terms of a career path? Like, your job is oftentimes you're bringing justice in a critical way. You're part of the system, right? We're obviously all here as part of advocates of the system, but I imagine that there's sometimes perceptions of a prosecutor that are challenging. And can you speak to some of that, and how that emotional load is manageable, and what people should be aware of if they choose that professional track?
Sure. And then it goes back to, some of what Enrique was talking about regarding, deportations and convictions, and specifically drug convictions that trigger deportation consequences. As an immigrant, I do take that pretty seriously as some form of punishment, because some cases, and this is not necessarily up here in New Hampshire, but when I was practicing as a prosecutor in Massachusetts, I would just stop and think for a second. Like, some of these defendants had come in, immigrated when they were about my age, maybe even younger. They just never naturalized. I naturalized pretty later on. I immigrated when I was 10, and I naturalized maybe 15 years or so after, and when I was an adult. If something would have happened, while I was still a permanent resident, that triggered deportation, I would have essentially gone back to a country that, yes, I'm familiar with, but wouldn't know how to survive. And that, I think about that when I hear at sentencings, the consequences, or just the warning, the alien warning. And it's like, you denied, you excluded from the United States, removed, denied admission, et cetera. And I'm just like, geez, that's a lot to hear and a lot to handle. For someone like a defendant I've had, where they've immigrated when they were like 10, 15, and they've been here for like 10 plus years, and they've made this their home. They have children. I do try to take special care when it comes to that, and see if there's, ways around. In the federal system is far more limited than in the state. In Massachusetts, there are ways, creative ways around sentencing that would, spare someone that consequence in cases that merited that sort of creativity. But in the federal system is a bit more difficult. And so I do feel it a bit more, just because there isn't much in terms of discretion to find a creative way around that. But, it's something that does weigh heavily on the decisions that you make, that you take, and the positions that you advocate in court as a prosecutor, because on the one hand, you see the consequence. On the other hand, some cases are serious enough that merit and warrant that consequence. Also because there are, communities that are impacted by those actions that, a defendant is convicted of. And to some extent, you're doing something, and advocating for those communities to be safe. There's children, Hispanic children, that want to grow up in a community that is safe from, say, drugs or violence, etc. And so there is that other flip side to it. But that in particular, for me, that consequence of deportation, exclusion, and denial of admission is something that, I don't know, for me, would be something that, that's obviously life altering.
It clearly impacts the whole family. I mean, to the way you illustrated it too, person here, 10 years in the country, has kids, may also have, there's a whole life, right? A whole life. And then to take a person out of that environment, and sure, like they continue to live and they're not incarcerated, but I mean, that's, the life is certainly very different. And we have representation here from, or at least generally from Peru and Mexico and Cuba. And those countries look very different than the United States. And, the rules of the road and what it takes to kind of survive are very different. So, I mean, I really appreciate the heaviness with which you approach that. I suppose that's sort of a way of saying this is not necessarily a job for everyone. Would you recommend that people think about anything in particular before they go into federal prosecution, in terms of making sure that they're going to, be able to survive, emotionally, the challenges that come inherent with that role?
I do. I do. And I have in the past, taken opportunities to speak with law students, college students, encouraging them to become prosecutors because while there aren't many, it's not as diverse a practice as maybe some others. I think you can make some changes, even if it's just on specific cases. The fact that I speak Spanish, I'm able to, and, bicultural also, I'm able to sort of identify nuances in like the cultural differences. I don't approach a certain activity that's reported to me, say by the police or an agent or something, through a particular lens. I do have, I think I bring a different lens to that, particular report of something. It doesn't come from like an accusatory lens initially. I'm open-minded, seeing like there's cultural differences. Maybe when I was in state practice, I used to handle a lot of domestic violence cases, and I was always curious, well, how did this happen? Disorderly disturbing the peace type of charges. And it's like, well, I can relate to some of that. I mean, I was a young kid in a tough neighborhood and, got into fights here and there. And it's like, it's something that's easily resolved. And somehow now it's become, a police matter and then a court matter. And now it becomes way more serious than I think, should be in some cases. But I would encourage them because I think bringing in a person who's sensitive to those different views, those different experiences. And I think coming from a particular Hispanic community where, you're close-knit, you're close with your family, with friends, etc., and you find those connections, you become sensitive to different experiences. And I think that insight is valuable when you come into a place and do criminal prosecution, where you have to also understand the other side and the defendant, the background, etc. So yes, that sensitivity I think is important to have. And I think more people from disadvantaged communities, be it Hispanic, Black or whatever, do bring a certain insight, and it would be valuable in this space.
Enrique, do you do any hiring at your firm? Do you have advice for maybe students about how to message that bicultural or multicultural background or bilingual capacity? Are there things that stand out to you in a resume when you see a young person, or things that you feel like are missed opportunities for maybe Hispanic students in particular, or speaking more generally to students that have, diverse backgrounds, that they can present themselves in a way that's particularly effective for employment. Because many of the students listening to this are thinking, yeah, I mean, these are very successful people. How do I get there? Any thoughts around how they can leverage this to sort of help get there?
Uh, well, I think, uh, well, one thing I will say is that, when I graduated law school, the rule of thumb was to keep your resume one page. Now I'm seeing a lot of resumes 3 pages long, and I'm like, I don't understand how that is, how that's ballooned. But when I'm looking at a resume, when I'm looking at a law student, and, I want to see, what I really would like to see is somebody that has experience, that either did some externship or was part of the clinic and is ready to go on day one, or maybe 75% ready to go on day one. Uh, I think that's what, personally, what I am looking at when I'm looking at the resume. I'm not looking really to train somebody from day one. I'm looking to see somebody that I can mold, and somebody that has some experience already, that I could train and show them the ropes, and and is able to pick up things quickly. And I think some experience would really help with that.
Maya, from your perspective, some advice for future lawyers, and again, kind of coming back to the theme of the podcast, if you have particular advice for future Hispanic lawyers in particular who may, be listening for voices they can identify with, ways to particularly frame a application to a first job or to the public defender's office, or your advice in general, because and maybe I'll put this in the frame of like I'm Jewish and I represent the Jewish Law Student Association. And right now there's a lot of turmoil in the world involving Israel, which is obviously different than being Jewish, but there's conflation of the two. And I have students that are taking things off their resume, hiding their identity in order to avoid maybe some potential blowback and concerns. That's something I counsel students on and trying to help them work through and think through. I don't know if that's something that, people from Hispanic heritage worry about too, or think about, but I guess I'm sort of trying to prod us toward a question of, is there a way to promote an identity and to bring out what is sort of, Cesar really, I think, said something very valuable, which is, coming from these different backgrounds and having a way to understand the other side is super valuable in the law. And I don't know that students are as comfortable as they might be in explaining that part of themselves. Do you feel that, do you see that from your perspective, and do you have any advice around it?
Yeah, so I think that it would be really a bit awkward to go into an interview and sort of, fly the banner, or the flag rather. And so that can feel really awkward. I have a couple bits of advice. One, any organization that thinks about identities, that thinks about race and diversity, they're going to have something on their website that says something about what they think about it, right? So you want to seek that out and see if it's something that you agree with, because if they don't have a statement at all and identity is something that's important to you, your identity is, then is this really a place where you want to go and be employed, where you want to work? If you feel like you might have to hide yourself just for the interview, how comfortable are you going to be, 3 months into that job? The other part and other value of doing that is, in every single interview you do, they're always going to ask you a question. And this is where you can use it to turn it around and sort of, you know, give your side of things without sort of just coming in awkward with the flag, right? Is you say, I looked at your website. I saw that, this is what you wrote. Personally, this is my background. How do you think that would fit in with, how your vision for your law firm or your program or what have you? And so that, and that's a tough question too, because everyone wants to come up with a good question. So I've just given you a really good question if that's the shoes that you're in, and it gives you an opportunity to put that foot forward. The other piece of advice that I would give really to anyone is you want to ask for what you want. And that means anything as little as I want to do this case with you to I want to come and work here, even though you aren't hiring anyone right now. Ask for what you want. And the other part of that is you can also just ask people to be your mentors. You don't have to wait to find some formal mentorship program. If you find someone that you feel like you identify with, that you think that you would be a good personality match, or maybe they're just in the field that you're really interested in going into, try to build a relationship with them and then just ask them, hey, would you mind sort of being a mentor to me? And my experience has been that most people are just so taken off guard and so flattered that they will say yes. And then you have a mentor.
Well, let's kind of wrap this with maybe some mentorly points. So if you were giving some advice for future Hispanic lawyers, or you can make this for future lawyers in general, is there anything in particular you would say? Because there might be a couple hundred who listen to this and will hear that advice. Enrique, is there something that you heard at some point in your career that, to me, it's like that thing I wish I knew 10 years ago? Do you have a say, something like that that has come to you? And maybe I'll even bring this back to a point I wanted to draw on. I mean, coming from two very different places, do you think that there's advice around where, how to choose where to go, right? Geography might matter. Do you have a perspective on how to find your happy place, or other advice for either Hispanic lawyers or lawyers in general that you would want as a takeaway from here?
I think that, for me, the big takeaway is that I have learned is number one, know your audience, and pretty much go with the flow as much as you can. That that to me, is for me anyways, that has always served me. I've learned that the hard way, when when you're trying to go against the grain, that it's gonna, it's not a good thing. But but go with the flow and be open-minded. I think those are the things that I have come to learn in my practice. I think that for future law students, I think that one thing that is going to serve you is go where you're needed. Go to the fine. When I left law school, I honestly did not want to be an immigration attorney, and I wanted to do family law. And lo and behold, nobody was looking for family lawyering in Miami, but I found this boutique firm in Miami Beach that was looking for a family and immigration attorney. And there you go. I've been doing it. I've been doing it for now 17 years. So I think that, you got to be, for me, open-minded. You just can't be like, no, this is what I'm going to do, especially after law school. You just got to throw out your resume and, and just see what sticks. And that's ultimately what I did. I started thinking I was going to be a family law attorney. And a year and a half into it, I started doing immigration, and I'm like, you know what? I like this. I like helping people out. I like fighting for the underdog. I like this feels good. This feels good, helping people stay in the country, or fighting for people to stay in the country. So I really, but it's going to take a while, and you just have to be patient. I think that's the advice I would give to future Hispanic attorneys.
If only I could learn to take some of that advice. Yeah, going with the flow, being open-minded, being patient, those are terrific virtues, and I would love to inculcate some more of those. Cesar, how about you? What are some takeaways that students who are listening to this might take from you in terms of, things that you wish you had known, same kind of question, things that, if you had known 10 years ago, or if you could inculcate earlier in your practice, you would have been happier, more successful, something you would pass on that worked for you.
The first thing that comes to mind is just taking initiative and taking action, which goes along with what's been said so far. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, for me, what it meant is when I graduated from law school in 2009, it was during the economic downturn. There was fewer and fewer jobs, graduating with a mountain of debt, no job prospects. I literally just took initiative and took action. Printed a bunch of resumes, walked up and down Main Street in Worcester, and I'm not exaggerating, walked in every single law office, dropped off a resume, every single one, and nobody called. And then out of nowhere, word must have gotten around, and I get a call from a sole practitioner to do a summer internship. This is my second year, 2008, right at the height of the economic downturn. And we started practicing with a sole practitioner who did a little bit of everything, which was the greatest thing because I got to do an appeal. I got to do some trial practice, some family law, so a little bit of everything. And that helped me in my resume so that I can have some experience, have something to talk about during an interview. By the time I graduated in 2009, again, there were no jobs and such. So I offered to actually work for free, full time. I wanted to be a law clerk. There weren't really any positions for me. So I managed to reach back to my networks that I made while I was in college. There was a judge who was sitting in Worcester at the time, who was my college professor in trial advocacy. And just through this web of, people that you meet along the way, and, your desperation at the time, mine, to take initiative and take action, I walked into the federal courthouse in Worcester and I said, I do this for free. I'm clerk for free. And he took me in, worked for like 3 full months. He knew the district attorney there, passed on, my resume. I never wanted to do criminal work. I just wanted to do civil stuff and, make money and all this thing. I never in a million years wanted to do criminal work, be it doing trials, any of that stuff. And then when I went to the DA's office, like Enrique said, you just keep an open mind, go with the flow. And that's what I did. 2 years later, I had like 30 jury trials under my belt. And to me, I'm thinking at the time I was maybe 2, 3 years out of law school. And I'm like, what is this good for? Oh, I tried a bunch of cases. Okay. I'm still not making money because I was in the public service in the DA's office. So, but then again, one thing leads to another, you start getting all these experiences and then eventually you meet more people get to know you, you build a reputation just by taking action, initiative, having an open mind, going with the flow. And then people see that you're an individual that doesn't mind doing this thing or that work. As I was progressing in my career, I ended up in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. And, it was to do drug work, investigative work. And I'd never done any of that stuff, writing warrants and all this stuff. I always just did trial work. So that was a great experience because then that became valuable for a federal prosecution job where almost everything is investigative and very few trial practice. So I don't know. I just, that advice really worked great for me, after like almost 15 years. But initially I was always telling myself, I don't want to go. I don't have time to prep for this trial. And I have to get up there and try this case. And I'm overburdened. I don't know how to write this, search warrant. I've never done one before. And always, every single day, just feeling frustrated. And then after I look back and I'm like, wow, thank goodness that I got that experience because I have a lot to talk about, a lot of stuff that I, know. And people think it's valuable to their organization. So, it worked out for me. And I think it's great advice. And I'm hoping that it works out for other students.
Yeah. I resonate with like many of these aspects, some of it in aspiration, but, I also got my first job in DC as a paralegal by I wrote up I wrote up my resume, and I wrote a cover letter to 55 law firms, and I hand delivered every single one of them. And then I sat around waiting for a call, and I took whatever job called me, and I ended up in antitrust. I had no idea what antitrust was, but I was ready to figure it out, and I wanted to be in law. So, that's what it took. And I think that is a good message, because a lot of people today are kind of used to the instant gratification of social media and the convenience of work from home. And, there's something about putting on a nice suit that you had to buy at Sears with your own money, that you're making, waiting tables and walking around to downtown firms and dropping off pieces of paper that might still work. Maya, you get the last word here before I just close us out. So final words or thoughts of encouragement for our listeners from you.
Well, I'm going to take advantage here, and I'm going to let everyone know that we are hiring both laterals and new lawyers. So apply for the public defender's office. You'll get to help people and have lots of warm feelings, and maybe sometimes work with Attorney Mesa for when we have to figure out immigration consequences. So come work for us. There's only some amount of angry crying.
Only some of that. Well, we'll certainly post that in the link below. We'll share it because I'm sure a lot of students would want that opportunity. But for now, thank you for today. I'm honored by your time and by this conversation. And thank you to all who are listening to this episode of Organize, the Business Law Breakdown, sponsored by the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Of course, everything said here reflects private views and not the views of the university, except for this one. Thank you to our incredible guests, Cesar Vega, Maya Dominguez, and Enrique Mesa, for invaluable insights and personal stories. This conversation in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month reminds us all of the importance of diverse voices in the legal profession and the power of community, mentorship, and identity in shaping our past. So whether you're a law student, an attorney, or just interested in the legal field, I hope today's episode inspired and encouraged you to think about the role we all play in making the legal profession more inclusive and more supportive. Until next time, this is Seth C. Orenberg. Thank you for tuning in.